In 2010 and 2009, Michael came over to the UK to speak at the Stars and Stones Forum and also at Megalithomania. And he delivered some lectures about South Africa that caused an immediate sensation. And we proposed that we should bring Megalithomania to South Africa. And here we are. Now, I'd like to introduce Michael Tellinger as the first speaker of Megalithomania Johannesburg 2011. Michael's discoveries, as you know, will no doubt eventually rewrite the history books of this part of the world, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce him. After a 30-year-long obsession with the origins of humankind and the genetic anomalies of our species, he wrote Slave Species of God, which became an instant bestseller in South Africa. When Johan Heine exposed the mystery of the stone ruins to South Africa in 2007 to Michael, they began an irreversible process of research that led Michael to some startling scientific conclusions and the completion of 2 more books, Adam's Calendar and Temples of the African Gods. His latest book presents a fascinating theory about the possible origins of modern man. It also implies a completely different view of our place on this planet and indeed the universe. By combining scientific readings with simple deductive reasoning with a megalithomaniac's mind, he comes up with a new vision of the history of the past of ancient Africa. Last week, he carried out extensive archaeological research with a team from San Diego, and this weekend will be the first presentation of his findings. Please give a huge Megalithomania welcome to the one and only Michael Tellinger.
Thank you very much. Let's get this show on the road. I'm going to start completely differently today with a statement that I normally throw about the dinner table, and that is, don't believe a word I say. I want you to take this in, absorb it, think about it, and go away and reach your own conclusions. I'm going to present you with a bunch of facts and some interesting discoveries and some theories and conclusions, but these are my theories and conclusions based on some scientific evaluations. That doesn't mean that everybody will agree, but after statistical evaluation and probabilities thrown about, I tend to sway towards my conclusions rather than any other conclusions. So until somebody else presents me with something more overwhelming, I'll stick to this. And I hope that you'll take something away from this that'll make you think at least. So to start off with, the history of our planet is not as it seems. This is a very important and crucial little bit of information that we need to sink into our subconscious. Because when we come out of school, and for those that are privileged enough to go to university, it's often associated with ego. And you think that I'm a well-educated guy, no one's going to lie to me or pull the wool over my eyes. Well, surprise, surprise. The higher your education, the more liable or the more probable you are for having the wool pulled over your eyes. And I am one of those perfect examples. It's taken me a lifetime to figure this out, and hopefully we can shortcut this process for a lot of people. Things are not as they seem. There's been a lot of stuff happening on this planet that makes no sense. And when you start delving and researching origins of humankind and asking those questions, who are we, where do we come from, and why are we here? I bet you that every one of you has asked those questions before. And not just you here, but millions of people around the world. Not just once, but many times. And here we are, still not sure. Who are we, where do we come from, and why are we here? What I call the great human puzzle. But I think the incredible revelations that the southern African continent is delivering to us now at this very special time in human history, approaching 2012 and other interesting time periods, it is very important to take these things into consideration. These things do not happen by coincidence. And the more I research, the more I realize that this is probably so. So when you start going back and researching human history and looking at the anomalies that don't make any sense, you realize very quickly that you can't just stick to history or archaeology or whatever it is, or geology. You've got to actually open your mind and learn and research everything that crosses your desk. Because if you don't, you will miss pieces of the puzzle. And a lot of the very important pieces of the puzzle come from indigenous knowledge, ancient indigenous knowledge that in the Western society especially is ignored and buried and forgotten. And that is a great shame. And it is from that ancient indigenous knowledge that a lot of wisdom comes. And you'll see how this ties beautifully into some very advanced modern scientific discoveries. The other fascinating thing is that you realize that all these areas of research, whether it's astronomy, archaeology, physics, mathematics, quantum physics, metaphysics, paranormal activity, you realize that all these areas start to cross over very, very quickly. And that you cannot separate anything from anything else. That there's some sort of a common denominator that holds them all together. Some sort of a weird energy field that holds all this information together. And that becomes very exciting. When that happens to any researcher, it is a life-changing experience, and it certainly was for me. And at that moment, you realize that everything is related. And that is a beautiful moment to reach in your life as a researcher with an inquiring mind. To remind you, that is our little planet that we live on. Sometimes we forget to look at it from a distance. And it's just a beautiful example of sacred geometry hovering in the midst of space, perfectly relating to everything around it, in absolute balance and harmony. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be there. To support that the history of our planet is not as it seems, that some really strange things have been going on for a long time, here's a wonderful photograph at the giant footprint near the Swaziland border, near a place called Mpaluzi. Now, you've got two choices as a researcher, archaeologist, or a scholar. You can either reject it as some hoax, or you can take it seriously and realize that this is the real article, this is the real thing. And the moment you do that, and you speak to geologists, when geologists see this, it sends shivers up their spine because it tells them immediately, if they remember what they were taught at school, this footprint is somewhere between 200 million and 3 billion years old. And that immediately tells you that something else has been going on this planet for a hell of a long time. And we're only starting to scratch the surface of this body of knowledge. So if history is written by the victors, how much do we really know about our human history? This is a fascinating subject because we get thrown these kind of idioms every day. You know, and we just swallow them and regurgitate them. Oh, history is written by the victors. Oh, of course, of course. But what does it actually mean? Well, it actually means a great deal. You've got to analyze these little statements and think about them. Because if you speak to statisticians, they'll tell you that if you take that statement at face value, it means that you lose at least 50% of information during any major conflict situation, right? Okay, that presents a huge problem for those that write our history books. And for the stuff that we read in history books and we trust and value as being accurate and true. Well, I'm going to show you that what we know about human history is so far removed from what happened that we actually cannot trust and believe anything. And we have to evaluate and reevaluate everything all the time. So, to first find the start of this little departure is we need to go back to the first so-called civilization on Earth. By the end of tonight, you'll realize that the Sumerians were supposed to be the first civilization on Earth, right? So they emerged sometimes around 6,000 years ago in the Mesopotamian area, and they gave us all the knowledge we have today. We read in history books that we should be grateful to the Sumerians for our knowledge of architecture, archaeology, medicine, music, even recipes and cooking and all the technical stuff that we use today, we pretty much inherited from the Sumerians. So if they were the first civilization on Earth and they started 6,000 years ago, just to, among you, throw out a number. How many wars have we had in 6,000 years? Smart man. Let's average it out at 1 war a year. So 6,000 wars in 6,000 years. Let's put this into our statistical model and see what it spits out, okay? And that's what you have. You start 6,000 years ago with year 1 with 100% of knowledge and information. And year 2, we only know 50% of that original knowledge. I'm not saying it's the absolute truth, but it's the closest to the truth, right? We've decided on that already. By the time you get to year number 8, we already know less than 1% of the original truth. And then the horror of horrors, when you get down 124 years into civilization, that's all you got to do. 124 years into civilization, 6,000 years ago, this is how much we know, that long number down there. And that's why I stop. I stop there because it's a very significant number. It's 10 to the minus 34, which is often referred to as Planck's constant. Now, that suggests that after that, anything else is really highly insignificant. And by the time we go 124 years into origins of humankind and human civilization, we know less about our human origins than is permissible by the laws of physics. So that's a thing I'd like you to put in the back of your mind and remember, because it's an important thing. So next time somebody starts to tell you about what Napoleon did here or what happened there and what the Olmecs and the Toltecs did and so forth, just say, okay, we know less than is allowable by the laws of physics about our human history, so let's think carefully about what we read in history books. We live in an electromagnetic universe. That's another very important thing. And if you think I'm going about ancient African civilizations in a weird way, very, very soon you'll see where this all leads to. It's important to lay this foundation. Otherwise, by the end of tomorrow, when I really spring the big wow on you, you're going to go, this guy's nuts. And, I don't want that to happen, obviously. So everything spins and vibrates. And that is the reality of our electromagnetic universe. And because it spins and vibrates, we can detect it, and we know it's present, because everything has a frequency, from subatomic particles to planets and solar systems that have these atomic-like structures and things rotating around other things. And then you see, especially when you move further away from that and you start looking at galaxies, you start seeing this spinning and vibrating effect really beautifully. These vortices that are scattered all over the universe. And then even the entire universe seems to have this spin motion, and leading physicists like Nassim Haramein point out very beautifully how this all fits together and how this energetic fields, these torus effects take place, and how they generate the energy and how they regenerate this twisting vortex motion energy. So everything spins and vibrates, and because of that, we can detect it. And this is what the electromagnetic universe gets presented to us, with very long waves on the left, and then the waves get higher and higher, and the frequencies get higher and higher until you get on this side. This is a continuum. It doesn't stop. It's infinite that way, and it's infinite this way, right? And everything, every specific thing, every tiny atom, molecule, cell, organelle, anything you can imagine vibrates at its own specific frequency. And once you know at which frequency it vibrates, you can affect it either positively or negatively, understanding the vibrational fields. The interesting thing is that out of this entire electromagnetic spectrum, we can only see with our eyes this sliver of light, which we call visible light over there. That's it. Everything else to the left and to the right of that, as far as we're concerned, is invisible. And I love this, because the macho guys always come out and say, well, if I can't see it and I can't touch it, show me physical proof. I want physical evidence. Then I'll believe it. Well, unfortunately, there is not always physical evidence for the stuff of the universe. And we have to look at other areas for evidence. So my answer to that is, if you want physical proof, and if you can't touch it and you can't see it, it doesn't exist, then obviously you must be a really big... And hopefully they get the message that you don't always have to see it to believe it. I'm glad I made my point. Sometimes it's dead silence. Okay, maybe my timing wasn't that good. Okay, so where does this take us with ancient civilizations? How did they respond to all the stuff on the left and the stuff on the right? And we realize that they had a very, very keen understanding of this. And they called it the third eye, the pineal gland, which they had a very keen understanding. And you'll see the third eye notion echoing through all ancient cultures, or pretty much all ancient cultures. And somehow they knew a lot more about this psychic ability, or the ESP, of being able to feel and read and understand the other frequencies that are not necessarily visible with our eyes, not the visible light, but all the other stuff. And that's pretty much what the pineal gland is. There's been huge amounts of study done on that. I suggest you go and have a look at that. It is